For 1,000 years the galaxy mocked Earth. They called it a forgotten world, a small rock turning around an average star. When alien scholars spoke of history, they did not speak of Earth. When alien children were taught about the great civilizations of the stars, the name of Earth was only mentioned as a joke. To them, Earth was weak. Humans were slow to leave their planet, slower still to settle on other worlds. While the Veiled Dominion spread its banners across 3 arms of the galaxy, and the Sarathi Empire built cities that floated above the clouds, Earth remained poor and quiet. Other species laughed at their clumsy machines, their short lives, their endless arguments among themselves. The galaxy saw humans as strange creatures, too fragile, too emotional, too stubborn. They had small bodies, soft skin, and bones that could break too easily. Compared to the great lizard warriors of Zorath or the towering insect armies of Kareth, the humans looked almost harmless. Their ships were smaller, their weapons older, their colonies fewer. To the mighty races, humanity was like a child trying to walk among giants. And so, the laughter began. Across the council worlds, a popular phrase was whispered, "As weak as a human." It became a saying for mistakes, for failures, for anything. Broken too easily. Children of alien worlds laughed when they heard stories of how humans once fought with metal swords and arrows, as if such tales were nothing more than a silly myth. Humans heard these insults. They saw the way other races looked at them. They knew they were being mocked, but they did not answer. They kept silent. They worked. They remembered. Because deep in their hearts, humans carried memories older than the stars of the council. Memories of war. Memories of pain. Memories of rising again and again when everything tried to push them into the dirt. No other race remembered what it was like to nearly destroy themselves. No other race knew the taste of ashes the way humanity did. For thousands of years before they ever reached the stars, humans had fought among themselves. They had built great nations and torn them down. They had set fire to their own cities, poisoned their own seas, broken their own skies. Again and again they came close to ending their story forever, but every time they rose, every time they rebuilt, every time they learned to stand again. That was humanity's secret. Not power, not size, not wealth, but the will to rise when nothing was left. The galaxy, blinded by arrogance, forgot this. To them, humanity was only a fragile race living on a dying planet. They thought humans were too small to matter, too emotional to be trusted, too weak to fight. But Earth remembered. Every insult, every joke, every laugh. It sank into the human soul like a blade. Generations passed, but the memory of the galaxy's mockery never faded. Fathers told their children. Mothers whispered to their daughters. They laugh at us, but one day, they will remember who we are. And on Earth itself, under the light of a sun the galaxy called ordinary, humanity waited. They built their ships slowly. They trained their soldiers quietly. They dreamed of the stars not as conquerors, but as survivors. For deep inside them was a fire the galaxy had forgotten, an unyielding spirit forged through centuries of struggle. The galaxy thought Earth was a joke, but Earth was a sleeping lion, and one day the lion would wake. Long before the galaxy united under its great council, humanity had already written countless chapters of struggle and survival. The aliens only saw the present Earth, quiet and weak, but they did not understand the shadows of history that shaped every human soul. Human history was carved in blood and fire. Before they reached the stars, humans fought against the harshness of their own world. They battled storms, earthquakes, freezing winters, and burning deserts. They hunted predators bigger and stronger than themselves, yet they learned to stand together and fight back. Fire became their first weapon, then stone, then steel. Survival was never given to them, it was earned. Later came the wars, terrible wars that should have ended their species. Entire nations rose and fell in oceans of blood. Cities were burned until nothing remained but ashes. Empires crumbled, and new ones rose from the ruins. Again and again, humans built towers of glory only to knock them down with their own hands. They poisoned their air, they broke their skies, they unleashed weapons that could erase millions in an instant. Any other race would have destroyed itself completely, but humanity refused. Each time they were crushed, they crawled out of the darkness. Each time they starved, they planted seeds again. Each time their world burned, they rebuilt their homes with shaking hands. That was the human way. Not strength of body, not endless technology, but the will to rise again when there was no reason left to rise. The galaxy never cared to study these truths. To alien historians, human wars were primitive and foolish. To alien philosophers, human courage was nothing more than a strange emotional noise. They looked at humanity's scars and saw weakness. But scars are proof of survival, and the humans carried more scars than any empire in the stars. On Earth, parents told their children stories of survival. A mother would whisper to her son about ancestors who survived hunger. A father would tell his daughter about soldiers who stood firm, even when they knew they would never return. These were not tales of victory alone. Many were stories of defeat, of terrible loss. But with every loss came a lesson. The galaxy did not understand this. Other races spoke proudly only of victories, only of shining golden ages. They wanted to erase their failures from history. But humans carried their failures. Like armor, they never forgot them. Every broken city taught them how to rebuild. Every betrayal taught them who to trust. Every war taught them the price of peace. That was why humans were different. When the galaxy mocked them for being emotional, they did not realize emotion was humanity's strength. Fear taught them caution. Anger gave them the power to fight. Love gave them something worth dying for. Grief taught them endurance. And hope. Hope was the light that pulled them out of every grave. The galaxy did not see this. They only saw a small planet with a struggling people far behind the great empires. But in every human heart, a quiet fire was burning, waiting for the day it would be needed again. Generations passed, and Earth's people carried their silent promise. They told themselves, "We may be weak, we may be mocked, but we know who we are. We know what we can endure." And so, while alien children laughed at jokes about fragile humans, human children listened to stories of ancestors who had survived impossible nights. While alien leaders dismissed Earth as unimportant, human leaders whispered to one another, "The galaxy forgets us. That is fine. But one day, they will remember." The echoes of the past lived inside every human, shaping them into something the galaxy could not measure or predict. The galaxy thought Earth was weak, but Earth's weakness was only a mask. Beneath it was a strength no empire had ever faced before. Because survival was not just history for humanity, it was their very soul. And in the silence of the stars, while the galaxy laughed, Earth remembered. The galaxy's laughter lasted for centuries. But one day a spark was lit in the darkness. It happened in a grand chamber at the very heart of the Galactic Council. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat together, their voices echoing across a hall made of glass and starlight. It was a place where decisions shaped the fate of billions. In that hall stood a single human ambassador. His name was forgotten by many, but his presence was remembered forever. He was old, with gray hair at his temples and tired lines on his face. His suit was plain, unlike the shining robes of alien nobles or the jeweled armor of warlike species. Yet his eyes were steady, and his voice carried a quiet strength. The meeting that day was heated. The council debated whether Earth should be allowed a greater share of trade routes. Some argued that humans did not deserve more resources, that they were too weak to handle responsibility. And then, the insult came. A senator from the Vale Dominion, tall and covered in golden scales, rose to his feet. His voice boomed across the chamber. "Why do we waste time on this fragile world? Humans are clumsy, slow, and break too easily. Let them stay in their cradle. The galaxy is no place for bones that snap like twigs." Laughter rolled through the chamber. Alien delegates chuckled. Some slapped their hands together in amusement. Others whispered jokes to their neighbors. To them, it was nothing new. Humanity had been mocked 1,000 times before. But this time the human ambassador did not lower his head. He did not remain silent as his people had done for generations. Instead, he stood tall. His voice was calm, but it carried across the room with unexpected force. "Fragile bones, perhaps," he said, his eyes moving from one alien to another. "But bones that never break." The chamber grew quiet. Some delegates frowned, others tilted their heads in confusion. The words were simple, but they carried weight. The Vale senator laughed again, but his voice sounded thinner now. "You humans always speak of your spirit. Words do not win wars." The ambassador did not argue. He only smiled faintly. "Words do not win wars, that is true. But they remind us why we fight them." And with that he sat down. The silence that followed was not the usual silence of boredom. It was the silence of thought. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy remembered something it had chosen to forget: that humanity had always endured, no matter the cost. The story of his words spread beyond the council chamber. On distant worlds, alien citizens repeated them, half in jest, half in wonder. "Bones that never break," they whispered. At first it was said with amusement, but the more they spoke it, the less funny it sounded. For the humans, those words were a spark of pride. On Earth, in the crowded streets of their cities, people whispered them like a prayer. On the colonies where humans worked long hours to keep their fragile outposts alive, the phrase became a quiet anthem. Soldiers painted it on their armor. Children drew it on the walls of schools. It was not just a reply to an insult. It was a reminder of who they were. The galaxy had grown arrogant, blind to the lessons of history. They thought strength was measured only in fleets and weapons, in wealth and numbers. But humans knew strength was also found in something smaller, harder, deeper. It was found in the refusal to fall, even when the universe itself tried to break them. The ambassador's words did not end the mockery. Many still laughed at Earth, calling them weak and fragile. But something had shifted. A seed of doubt had been planted in the galaxy's heart, and for humanity, that spark grew into a fire. They began to prepare quietly, silently, with patience that only those who had suffered for centuries could understand. They did not shout their plans to the stars. They did not demand respect. They simply waited, because they knew the galaxy would one day face a storm too great to withstand. And when that day came, humanity would be ready. The galaxy thought peace would last forever. For centuries, the Great Council held power over thousands of worlds. Trade was rich, travel was easy, and most believed no enemy could ever rise strong enough to challenge them. Mockery, pride, and arrogance filled the stars. But peace is fragile. And in the far darkness beyond the edge of mapped space, something ancient stirred. The first signs were whispers, outposts gone silent, colonies disappearing without warning. At first, the council dismissed them as accidents, a failed reactor, a pirate raid, or natural disaster. But then the silence spread like a shadow, system by system, until it could no longer be ignored. They came without warning. The Exhal Reavers. No one knew where they had come from. Some said they were an ancient species awakened from the void. Others whispered they were not life at all, but a plague of machines gone mad. What everyone agreed on was simple. The Reavers devoured everything. They did not conquer. They did not enslave. They consumed. Their ships were black shapes that blotted out the stars, moving like a tide that never ended. Their weapons burned through shields and armor as if they were paper. Fleets that had ruled for centuries shattered in minutes. Worlds burned. Cities fell. Billions screamed into the void, and then were gone. The council called for unity. All species were ordered to join together and resist. Armies were raised, fleets gathered, alliances forged. Yet the Reavers crushed them all the same. Every victory of the council was small, temporary, bought at impossible cost. For every swarm destroyed, 10 more appeared. Panic spread. Great empires that once mocked Earth trembled in fear. The Veiled Dominion, proud and arrogant, lost half its border worlds within weeks. The Sarathi Empire, once thought unbreakable, abandoned colonies just to save its core planets. The insect armies of Kareth, famous for their endless numbers, were drowned beneath the greater endlessness of the Reavers. Hope began to die. In the grand halls of the council, desperation filled the air. Leaders shouted at one another, accusing and blaming. Some begged for peace, though no peace was possible with an enemy that only consumed. Others spoke of retreat, of hiding, of saving what little they could. And then, someone said the unthinkable, call upon Earth. The words were met with silence, then disbelief. Call upon the humans? The fragile species they had mocked for 1,000 years? The world they had laughed at during every council session? Surely it was madness, but desperation makes even the proud bend. Humanity had always been a minor voice in the council, ignored and mocked, but they were still a member. And in the face of annihilation, every voice mattered. A message was sent. The council expected Earth to beg for protection. They expected humanity to hide behind stronger allies. They expected fear, weakness, surrender, but the answer was not fear. It was fire. On Earth, the message was read with silence. Leaders gathered in dimly lit rooms, their faces grim. They knew the Reavers would not stop at the outer worlds. Sooner or later, the storm would come to Earth itself. And humanity, mocked or not, would not wait for death. Ships were prepared. They were not the largest nor the fastest. Many were old, patched with scars from earlier struggles. But inside them were men and women with eyes that carried storms, soldiers who remembered the stories of survival, captains who had studied the wars of their ancestors, families who knew that survival was not a gift. It was something fought. For when Earth's fleets rose from the blue planet, they did not rise as beggars. They rose as warriors. And across the galaxy, whispers spread. For the first time, humanity was not silent. For the first time, the galaxy wondered if perhaps the fragile bones of Earth were not so fragile after all. The storm had arrived, and with it, humanity's chance to show the galaxy who they truly were. The council had expected hesitation. When they sent their desperate call to Earth, many believed the humans would refuse. Others thought they would cry out for protection, begging the stronger races to shield them from the storm. A few even whispered that humanity might surrender before the war truly reached them. But Earth's answer was not what the galaxy expected. The response came in a single message from the human leadership. It was short, without ceremony, without grand words. It simply said, "We will fight. Prepare a place for us on the front lines." When the council read it, many laughed in disbelief. The Veiled Dominion mocked the message openly, claiming humans had no fleets worth sending. The Sarathi scoffed, saying humanity would only get in the way. Even the insect generals of Kareth sneered, doubting that such fragile creatures could survive even a single battle. But then the humans came. From the skies of Earth and its scattered colonies, fleets rose. They were not like the shining armadas of the great empires. Many ships were old, patched together from scraps and rebuilt again and again. Some were transport vessels hastily turned into warships, carrying weapons bolted onto their hulls. Their technology was not the most advanced, their shields not the strongest, their engines not the fastest. But inside those ships were humans, soldiers, engineers, pilots, men and women whose eyes carried something the galaxy had forgotten. A storm that had been burning for centuries. The first time the human fleets appeared at a council staging ground, the other species watched in silence. They expected nervousness, clumsy maneuvers, and hesitation. Instead, they saw discipline. Human ships moved like wolves in formation, not shining, but sharp. Soldiers stood in silence, not boasting, not trembling, only waiting. There was something unsettling about their quiet readiness. On the ground, human armies disembarked. Their armor was not as sleek as alien designs, but it was practical, battle-tested, built to endure hardship. Their weapons were not elegant, but they were reliable, forged with a simple purpose: to kill whatever threatened them. Most of all, there was something in their faces that unsettled the galaxy's veterans. A calmness, a determination, as if they had already accepted death and were not afraid of it. One alien general whispered to another, "They look like people who have already lived through the end of the world." And in truth, they had. Humanity had carried the memory of its own near destruction for thousands of years. Now, facing the Reavers, that memory was no burden. It was their strength. The Council commanders gave humans secondary positions, hoping to keep them away from the most dangerous fighting. But the humans refused. "We did not come here to hide," one captain said coldly. "Put us where the line is weakest. That is where we belong." Some thought it arrogance, but soon they would see it was something else entirely. When the first battles came, humanity fought as if they had been waiting for this moment their entire existence. They did not flinch when outnumbered. They did not retreat when their lines broke. They adapted, endured, and struck back with a fury that shocked even the most warlike empires. Human pilots rammed their damaged ships into enemy vessels rather than retreat. Infantry fought street by street, holding ruined cities long after others would have surrendered. Engineers rebuilt broken defenses in the middle of bombardments, refusing to abandon their posts. Every human carried the memory of survival, and with each clash against the Reavers, that memory turned into fire. The galaxy, which had mocked Earth for so long, now watched in silence. Whispers spread through the fleets and armies. The humans do not stop. The humans do not break. For the first time, the galaxy began to see Earth not as a joke, but as something terrifying and awe-inspiring. A species born in fire, carrying scars older than empires, now standing in the storm without fear. The human answer to the galaxy's mockery was clear. They would fight, they would bleed, and they would never, ever yield. The humans did not have to wait long. The Reavers were already moving toward the Council's border worlds, devouring everything in their path. Entire fleets had tried to hold them back and failed. The galaxy needed a miracle. What they got instead was humanity. The first battle came at a mining colony on the rim of Council space. It was a small world, not rich or powerful, but its fall would open the path to dozens of other systems. The Council had already stationed fleets there, but morale was broken. Every soldier knew the Reavers were coming, and no one believed the colony could be saved. When the human fleet arrived, the other commanders expected hesitation. They expected the humans to question orders or ask for safer positions. But the humans only sent a single message: "Point us to the enemy." And then the storm came. The sky above the mining world turned black as the Reaver swarm arrived. Their ships moved like shadows, endless and merciless. They poured into the system like a flood, blotting out the stars. The Council fleets shuddered, already preparing for retreat. But the humans did not move back. They moved forward. Their ships were smaller, less advanced, but they fought like wolves among giants. Human captains did not hesitate to throw themselves into impossible battles. Some deliberately rammed their ships into the largest Reaver vessels, detonating their cores in blinding fire. Pilots with burning engines steered their dying craft into enemy formations, dragging dozens of Reaver ships down with them. The aliens on the Council command bridge watched in shock. "They are sacrificing themselves," one whispered. "No," another corrected. "They are fighting as if survival itself depends on it." On the ground, the story was the same. Reaver creatures poured into the colony's cities, crawling across walls and tearing through defenses. Other armies had already begun to collapse under the pressure, but the humans stood firm. Human soldiers fought street by street, building by building. When ammunition ran low, they used knives, shovels, and bare hands. They fought not only for victory, but for every second of survival. Each human death bought more time for the living. Each soldier who fell dragged an enemy down with them. In one ruined district, A squad of human engineers rebuilt a broken shield generator while the battle raged around them. Bombardments shook the ground. Fire rained from the sky, but they refused to abandon their task. With bleeding hands, they brought the generator back to life, saving thousands of lives behind the barrier. In another city, human medics carried the wounded across burning streets. They were unarmed, yet they did not run when the enemy came. They shielded the weak with their own bodies, refusing to let despair win. Everywhere, humans turned the hopeless into defiance. Hours passed, and something unbelievable began to happen. The Reaver advance slowed. For the first time, the swarm was not devouring with ease. The humans had forced them to fight for every inch. The other council armies, inspired by what they saw, began to hold their lines again. Soldiers who were ready to retreat now stood taller, fighting alongside the humans as if the fire had spread into their own hearts. The galaxy was watching. News of the battle traveled faster than light, carried by whispers and transmissions. Across distant worlds, alien citizens who had once laughed at Earth now spoke in awe. The humans are still standing. The humans are not afraid. The humans fight as if they cannot be broken. By the time the battle ended, the mining world still stood. The Reavers had been driven back, not destroyed, but halted. For the first time since the war began, the galaxy had tasted something it thought lost: hope. When the human fleet limped back to the staging ground, scarred and broken, silence filled the command halls. No one laughed. No one mocked. Every species present understood what they had just seen. The humans had not only fought, they had reminded the galaxy of something forgotten: that courage, sacrifice, and unyielding will were weapons as powerful as any fleet. And in that silence, a new thought was born, whispered across the stars. If this is how humans fight at the beginning, what will they become when the storm grows darker? The first victory was small, but its echo shook the galaxy. The Reavers had been slowed, and for the first time in years, a world had been saved. The colony stood scarred and broken, yet alive. And at the center of this miracle were the humans, the race everyone had mocked for 1,000 years. The galaxy could not ignore what it had seen. Across council space, news of the battle spread like wildfire. Soldiers who had nearly lost faith whispered stories of human bravery. Citizens spoke in awe of the fragile creatures who had stood in the fire and refused to fall. Even in the grand chambers of the council, the laughter that once followed Earth's name was replaced with uneasy silence. The memory of fire had returned. For centuries, humans had been dismissed as weak, too emotional, too reckless. But now those same emotions were seen in a different light. Courage, sacrifice, defiance, these were not weaknesses. They were the weapons that allowed humanity to survive the impossible. In one report, a council observer described a human soldier holding a ruined street alone. The soldier had been wounded, his weapon half destroyed, yet he fought until the enemy stopped coming. When reinforcements found him, he was gone, but the street remained in human hands. The observer wrote, "I do not understand them. They fight as if death is an old friend." Another story told of a squad trapped in the lower levels of the colony. Instead of surrendering, they lured the Reavers into a fuel chamber and ignited, it destroying themselves and the enemy together. To the humans, it was not madness, it was duty. To the rest of the galaxy, it was a reminder of something ancient and terrifying. Whispers began to stir. Now I see why they survived their own wars. Now I remember why humanity still exists when it should have destroyed itself long ago. For the first time in a millennium, the galaxy remembered. Generals from other species began studying human tactics. They saw how quickly humans adapted, turning weakness into advantage. They noticed how humans accepted losses not with despair, but with determination. Where other armies would retreat, humans dug in. Where other fleets broke, humans pressed forward even with shattered ships. It was as if they carried inside them the memory of every fire they had endured on Earth, every famine, every plague, every war. That memory lived in their blood, shaping every decision, every action. And when the galaxy saw it, they trembled. Because they realized humanity was not fragile. Humanity was forged. The laughter of the past now felt bitter. Those who had mocked Earth found themselves silent. Leaders who once called humans useless now wondered if perhaps deep down they had always feared what would happen if humanity was truly tested. On Earth itself, pride returned like a rising tide. The words spoken long ago in the council, fragile bones perhaps, but bones that never break, were painted on walls, shouted in the streets, sung by children. Families who had once felt shame now carried their heads high. Humanity had been given the chance to prove itself, and they had not wasted it. But alongside the pride was grief. The victory had not come without cost. Thousands of humans lay dead, their bodies scattered across the ruined colony and the wrecks of their ships. Yet even in grief, humanity found strength. They mourned, but they did not despair. They had always mourned, always buried their dead, always carried scars, and always risen again. The galaxy watched this too and could not understand it. How could a species endure such pain and still stand taller after every loss? How could they carry both sorrow and hope so strongly at the same time? The answer was simple: because they had done it for all of history. The humans had never forgotten their past. And now the galaxy remembered as well. They remembered why humanity had survived its own madness. They remembered why humanity was still here when it should have been dust. They remembered why, once upon a time, ancient legends had whispered of humans with respect and with fear. The memory of fire was alive again, and the Reavers, relentless and endless, were about to learn what the galaxy had forgotten. The war reached its darkest hour at the place later called the Shattered Rings. It was a system once known for its beautiful twin asteroid belts, glowing like silver crowns around a quiet star. But when the Reavers came, beauty turned into a battlefield. The Reaver swarm was larger than anything the galaxy had seen before. Thousands of black, living ships poured into the system, their hunger endless. Whole fleets had already fallen trying to hold them back. The Council had little left to give. Every species sent what ships they could, but their numbers were small. Fear hung heavy across the Allied fleet, and many whispered that this battle would be their end. Among them were the humans. Their ships were scarred from earlier fights, patched with crude repairs, engines coughing smoke. But they came anyway. They knew they might not return. They knew this system could become their grave. Yet not a single human captain turned away. Battle began with fire. The Reavers struck like a storm, breaking lines, swallowing ships whole. Alien admirals panicked as formations collapsed. The swarm moved like a tide, impossible to stop. Voices cried across the comms, "We cannot hold them. Our defenses are breaking." And in that chaos the humans acted. Human ships did not retreat. They did not form walls. Instead, they charged. Small, fast vessels darted into the swarm, drawing Reavers away from the collapsing lines. Larger human carriers rammed into enemy clusters, detonating themselves to open paths for others. What looked like madness was, in truth, sacrifice with purpose. One by one, human ships died, but every death bought time. Every explosion delayed the swarm. Every fallen crew gave another world a chance to live. On the flagship Iron Will, Captain Mara Denholm gave the order that sealed their fate. Surrounded and outnumbered, she told her crew, "They think we are weak. Show them how wrong they are." The Yao. Iron Will plowed straight into the heart of the swarm. Its guns burned until they melted. Its hull was torn apart, but still it pushed forward. When the engines finally failed, the captain ordered the self-destruct. The explosion tore through hundreds of Reaver vessels, creating a hole in the swarm wide enough for the rest of the fleet to regroup. The Allied commanders could not believe what they were seeing. No other species would throw themselves into death, so willingly, so fiercely. But the humans did it without hesitation. They did it because they carried the weight of every sacrifice made in their history. Across the battlefield, stories unfolded. A squadron of human fighters flew into a Reaver hive ship's mouth, detonating inside and ripping it apart from within. Crippled destroyer, engines gone, locked its weapons in manual mode and fired until the crew perished, their last shot saving a retreating convoy. A single human marine squad on a broken station held back boarding reavers long enough for civilians to escape, fighting until their voices went silent. Every act of defiance, every sacrifice, became part of the turning tide. The galaxy watched in awe. For the first time in 1,000 years, they understood the truth. Humanity's strength was not in numbers or weapons. It was in their unbreakable will, their ability to face death and still fight on, their refusal to surrender, even when the universe itself told them to fall. By the time the battle ended, the system was in ruins. The asteroid rings were shattered, broken into endless debris. The Allied fleet was nearly destroyed, but the swarm had been stopped. The impossible had been done. The price was heavy. Almost every human ship was gone. Entire families wept across Earth and its colonies. Yet their tears were mixed with pride. Humanity had not only stood, they had changed the course of the war. The Council declared it a miracle. Survivors called it madness. But the humans knew what it truly was. It was a message written in fire and blood, spoken louder than any word. We are human. We will not break. We will not bow. Remember us. The shattered rings became sacred ground. And from that day forward, no one in the galaxy dared laugh at Earth again. The shattered rings had cost humanity almost everything, yet it had given the galaxy something priceless: hope. For the first time since the Reaver invasion began, the swarm had been stopped. And it was not stopped by the great empires, nor the mighty fleets of ancient species. It was stopped by the humans, the fragile race the galaxy had mocked for 1,000 years. The story spread like a storm. On distant worlds, children whispered the names of human captains who had chosen fire over surrender. Soldiers in broken armies carried human banners alongside their own, as if to borrow some of that unshakable spirit. Even council leaders who once laughed at Earth now spoke in respectful silence whenever humanity was mentioned. But for the humans themselves, there was no time to bask in glory. They mourned their dead, rebuilt their ships, and prepared for what came next, because they knew the Reavers were not finished. The swarm had been slowed, not destroyed, and the galaxy, tired and wounded, was still too afraid to face them head-on. It was humanity who lit the flame again. On Earth, leaders gathered not in grand halls but in a plain underground chamber, the kind used by their ancestors during wars, long forgotten. There they spoke not of pride but of duty. They had paid with blood at the shattered rings, and now that sacrifice demanded action. The decision was made. Humanity would not wait. They would carry the fight to the swarm. When the call went out, volunteers flooded in. Farmers left their fields, students left their classrooms, and workers left their homes. They joined not because they expected victory, but because they refused to see their children live in a galaxy ruled by monsters. Every human who stepped forward carried the same thought: if I fall, let my death buy another sunrise for someone else. The fleets that rose were smaller than the great armadas of old empires, but they were fierce. Ships bore scars like medals, patched with steel and willpower. Soldiers carried weapons that looked crude compared to alien technology, but their eyes burned with fire. When they launched, the galaxy watched in silence. No one believed such a small force could achieve more than survival, yet everyone felt the weight of something greater in their hearts. The first counterattack struck like thunder. Human fleets leapt into systems already half devoured by the swarm. Instead of defending, they hunted. Instead of retreating, they pressed forward. Their ships cut through the swarm with reckless courage, every maneuver daring, every strike filled with fury. And when human soldiers landed on the ground, the true roar began. They fought in ruined cities, in broken stations, on dying moons. They did not fight with elegance or perfect formations. They fought with raw defiance. They fought as if each heartbeat was a weapon. Alien commanders who witnessed it described the battles with trembling voices. They do not fight to win. They fight to make the enemy fear them. The Reavers, mindless as they seemed, began to hesitate. For the first time, they met prey that would not run. Prey that struck back even when wounded, even when dying. Humanity's roar was not only heard, it was felt. Other species began to stir. Inspired by human fire, small fleets that once hid in fear joined the counterattack. Soldiers who had lost hope found it again. The galaxy's great empires, shamed by their silence, sent reinforcements. But everywhere the Reavers turned, it was the humans at the front, leading the charge, never yielding. On one world, when the swarm landed in numbers beyond counting, a single human battalion stood against them. The battle raged for 3 days. When relief forces arrived, they found only ashes and a message written in blood across a ruined wall. "We held. Now it is your turn." The galaxy trembled at those words, because it was no longer just a human war. Humanity's roar had awakened something across the stars. Fear was turning into unity. Silence was turning into defiance. The weak race that had been mocked for 1,000 years was now the voice that carried through the darkness. And as fleets gathered, as soldiers sharpened their blades and loaded their rifles, one truth became clear. The galaxy no longer led humanity. Humanity now led the galaxy. The roar of Earth was the roar of every world that refused to die. The galaxy held its breath. For centuries, the Reavers had been a nightmare beyond imagining, an endless storm of destruction that no fleet could stop. Worlds had fallen, empires had trembled. But now, humanity stood at the front, not as weak observers, but as leaders, as warriors, as the spark of hope the galaxy had long forgotten. The final battle began at the heart of the swarm, a dark system where the Reaver fleets had gathered in unimaginable numbers. Stars disappeared beneath the mass of black ships, swirling like a living shadow. Council fleets, once proud and confident, waited behind the humans, their fear palpable. Every alien commander knew that if the humans failed, the galaxy itself would fall. But humanity did not hesitate. Captain Mara Denholm returned. From the shattered rings led the fleet. Her ship, the Iron-Willed II, bore scars from 1,000 fights, yet she commanded with quiet certainty. Across the bridge, her officers moved in perfect rhythm, their eyes steady, their hearts burning with the fire of survival. "Remember who we are," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of generations. "We are the humans. We survive, we endure, we fight." And with that, the fleet surged forward. The Reavers struck first, waves upon waves of black ships descending like falling mountains. Their weapons tore through fleets, their claws ripped stations apart, and their cries echoed across the void. The galaxy watched in horror. It seemed impossible that humanity could hold, but humanity did more than hold. Small human fighters darted through the swarm, striking critical points, confusing and dividing the enemy. Larger ships rammed, detonated, and blocked paths for reinforcements. Ground forces stormed Reaver-controlled colonies, their movements coordinated with the fleet above. A single mind of defiance. Human soldiers fell. Pilots crashed. Engineers died rebuilding weapons in the midst of battle. Yet each sacrifice carried meaning. Every life given bought another chance. Every act of bravery a step closer to victory. The galaxy began to notice the impossible. Where other species had faltered under fear, humans pushed forward. Where other commanders had hesitated, humans charged. And with every strike, the Reavers began to falter. In the midst of the chaos, humans on the front lines used tactics no alien species had considered. They exploited weaknesses in the Reaver swarm's coordination, trapped clusters, and created openings where none seemed to exist. Slowly, systematically, the tide turned. Alien fleets that had once doubted them began to follow. Soldiers inspired by human courage stood taller. Ships moved with renewed confidence. The galaxy, once mocking, now rallied behind the species it had scorned. The final moments came in a blaze of fire and light. Captain Denholm's Iron-Willed II led the strike against the central hive of the swarm. Her crew fought until the last moment, detonating the ship in a massive explosion that ripped through the heart of the Reaver fleet. Thousands of enemy vessels were destroyed instantly, breaking the swarm's coordination forever. Across the galaxy, the remaining Reavers were hunted down, system by system, Their endless tide was no longer unstoppable. The galaxy, united and led by humanity, pushed them back into the void from which they had come. When the smoke cleared, the galaxy looked on in awe. Human ships, battered and blackened, floated among the wreckage. Survivors cheered, not for glory, but because they had endured, because they had survived when survival had seemed impossible. The Council, the empires, the millions of worlds that had once mocked Earth, now remembered. They remembered the humans who had endured their own world's destruction, who had fought through fire and famine, through war and loss, through every test the universe had thrown at them. For 1,000 years the galaxy had laughed, but now the laughter was gone. It had been replaced with respect, awe, and fear. Humanity had shown them the truth. Strength is not in size or technology or numbers. Strength is in the will to rise again and again, even when the odds are impossible. Strength is in surviving the unthinkable and turning suffering into fire. And Earth, the world once mocked, the fragile cradle of humanity, now stood at the center of a galaxy that would never forget. Captain Denholm, looking at the remnants of the Reaver fleet, whispered quietly to herself, as if speaking for every human who had fought and fallen. We are humans. We endure. We rise. And now you all remember why. The galaxy remembered, and the humans, silent and proud, continued to stand, unbroken, unyielding, unstoppable.